I'll give you a really good example of something that I put in place just in the last 2-3 weeks, which has dramatically reduced the number of bugs that I'm finding in production.
Welcome to the Agentic Review, the podcast where we explore what good code really means in the age of AI software development.
I'm Nina Ndukwe, Developer Relations Lead.
And I'm Itamar Friedman, the co-founder and CEO of Kodo.
So let's get into it.
Today, we're joined by Matt Makai, a software developer and educator who built full-stack Python into one of the most read Python learning resources on the internet, scaled Twilio's developer content engine to over 5,000 blog posts, and led developer relationship at Assembly AI, LaunchDarkly, and DigitalOcean.
Matt has spent decades at the intersection of developer education, community, and Python systems. And recently, since March 2026, he has gone all in on Plushcap, his own developer intelligence platform tracking trends across AI coding tools, multi-agent systems, and the broader developer tooling landscape.
So without further ado, Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. That was quite the generous introduction. When I get asked at parties, I'm usually just they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a software developer. And then people either get really excited by that or not. So that's my grounding for all this.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear more about yourself, and maybe to give it a bit of a framing. You just left DigitalOcean in March 26 to go full-time on Plushcap, tracking those 500 AI coding tools. In your own word, tell us more about Plushcap and what exactly are you solving and why now?
Yeah, so I've been a software developer for decades. I was a professional software developer for over 10 years and still code every single day. But even before that, before being a professional software developer, I was always just coding. I started out in, basic, like a lot of folks when, MS-DOS was the thing, and played a lot of text-based MUDs growing up. And that's kind of where I learned how to program, got into C++, Java, that sort of thing. So for me, everything around developer relations, developer marketing, developer tooling, developer experience, it all comes back to being a software developer. I just want to have a great experience while I'm trying something out. I'm constantly testing new tools, different workflows, things like that. And so a lot of that has fed into my entire career, either as a heads down software developer or building and leading developer relations teams, or just helping companies figure out how do we attach onto some of the biggest developer trends that are coming up.
So more about Plushcap. What are you trying to solve and why now?
Yeah. So originally, when I was building out the developer content program at Twilio, I was hand tracking in a spreadsheet every blog post that was coming up, that would publish metadata about it. And I'm like, this is crazy. Why am I doing this in a spreadsheet? I'm a software developer. This could be a database, and this email should be a database. And so that's essentially what kind of started this whole thing, was sort of building some stuff on nights and weekends, mostly because I had the spreadsheet for work, but then I'm advising all these startups, doing dev tooling, including Assembly AI, where I joined later. And I just found that every company was kind of asking the same thing, what is our content? Whether it's written or videos, how do we do that well? How do we measure all those things? How do we benchmark ourselves against other companies, either ones that are larger where we want to go, or just peer companies where we know we're competing with them, or they're sort of in an adjacent space? So that was kind of the start of Plushcap 4 years ago. This is a project I worked on nights and weekends, used by thousands of people. I don't charge for it. It's kind of just a side project. But the whole idea was that was a lot of what I needed. And then other people were asking me for that. And then more recently, a big thing that has just kind of exploded is people just need to know what the trends are and measure them. I think you can go back to something just this a couple months ago, OpenClaw. It kind of exploded out of nowhere. Now, to be fair to Peter Steinberger, he was working on that for a year before it kind of was the overnight success, the same old story. But that's a big piece of it, is there's hundreds of OpenClaw moments for a lot of companies, and they typically reach them too late. And so that's essentially what Plushcap allows you to do, is you see the data, and then through my own expertise, I can actually see where a lot of these trends are going.
That's amazing. I'm wondering more about those trends though. What are you seeing? What are you seeing at Plushcap that most people maybe aren't paying attention to yet, or don't even know is going on really?
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll read stuff from VCs, for example, like Andreessen Horowitz, and they'll be talking about some niche domain that they're investing in, and you'll hear a lot about it. Maybe in 2023, you hear about voice AI, and it seemed maybe that's going to be a thing. But then you actually look at the data, and voice AI actually really exploded this year. Like the amount that companies are doing with voice AI is like unbelievable. And I think that what happened was with this trend, just to take one trend, is there was a lot of investment in the area. It finally matured, and then the use cases rapidly proliferated to the point where like it kind of became something that was much easier to build, much cheaper to build on. It was actually something that developers cared more about, and then companies really started to build with all these different tools. And so like a lot of times you'll hear about trends at different stages of the maturity process. In traditional marketing, this is kind of like crossing the chasm. You got your early adopters, and then you got your chasm to like the pragmatists. And you will only have a gut feel if you kind of look on X or on LinkedIn. But if you actually look at the data, you'll see when these things are actually exploding. And the whole point is to like be in early just before it's exploding. You don't want to be in, it's like being an investor. You don't want to invest in a stock like 3 years before it goes and crazy runs up. Like you want to invest right before, ideally, so that you don't have this huge opportunity cost of waiting. So that's a lot of what happens with these developer trends is like when companies attach themselves on to appropriate developer trends, not just any generic developer trend, but ones that are really close in their space, like AI coding tools, their growth will far outstrip their competitors. It's just really obvious. You see this pattern over and over again with the companies that win.
Yeah, timing is critical. Focusing a little bit more about developer tools and current trends, I think you've said developer write more bugs when typing less. Am I correct? And if so, tell us a little bit more what you mean. Are you saying that we shouldn't use coding agents?
Oh, I mean, not at all. I just think that I don't know if that was an exact phrase by me, but and I may have used that in the past, but I do think that ultimately, like a big thing that has been consistent for me, and I've undergone my own experience, right? I've written code by hand for decades. I use all the agentic AI coding tools from all the big labs and some of the smaller players. And at the end of the day, like what I've found is like it really is your expertise that really matters, and continuing to just be actively participating in the process of creating software. I think that's the big piece that a lot of people are missing. It's like I hear a lot about just automating the code in the back end. And whether you write more code by hand or less code by hand, being an active participant, like the human in the loop, is actually just much more important than I think that a lot of people are giving it credit for. I think a lot of the fears around agentic coding are that it's just going to wholeheartedly like replace software engineers completely. And actually, like I think the companies that are doing the best have found that that's not happening at all. Like they're relying on their architecture. They're relying on a lot of judgment that happens. And so I think that's really where, whether you write more code or less code, really where companies are seeing the outsized gains.
Yeah, well, what I'm hearing from you is, for example, that it's not necessarily true that the more you type less, the more bugs there is. It's a lot about, are you developing your own skills, put intended, right? And are you putting the right system and workflows? And then actually maybe you're getting less bugs, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a really good example of something that I put in place just in the last like 2-3 weeks, which has dramatically reduced the number of bugs that I'm finding in production, which is OpenAI released their Codex review. Shout out to Dominic Kundal, who created this. And it's a Claude Code plugin. So now everything that I do, my entire workflow is like build with Claude Code. For better or worse, I know there's been a lot of challenges with Opus lately, but I'm still using Opus with Claude Code. And then I run all of the changes through Codex and do everything within Claude Code. Like that's the workflow. And then while I'm waiting for Codex to get back with a review, then I can hand review and do my, git status of all the different changes myself as well. And that's been a huge improvement to my workflow. Previously, I was like, how am I actually going to review all of these code changes? Because I actually felt like I needed to actively myself review absolutely everything. And now I found by adding one more step in the workflow process, and I'm sure others have come up with this months before, but for me personally, it finally clicked when I was like, oh, I don't have to go over and build this whole other workflow. I was like, I can just use it as part of my existing workflow. That's when things really worked a lot better for me. So I think you just have to be like, as you're saying, like very active about what is my workflow? How do I improve my workflow? It's just like constant discipline about how do I become a better, frankly, a better software developer, a better software engineer. And that's been true for decades. It's like no different. Like there's nothing different today than like 5 years ago. As much as people want to talk doom and gloom about the next LLM, you have to become a better software developer. You have to invest in yourself. The tools are different, but the mindset, the growth mindset doesn't change at all.
Yeah, I like the way you said that because it sounds like cutting out the noise right? No matter what the trends that might happen, focusing on like the actual skills that you can develop. And I think that's super important. And I haven't tried out that plugin yet, but I do know that so many people were asking or trying to build a tool that would make that code review process easier right from where they already work. And so it's really cool to see that that came out. And when you were talking about, on the topic of developers and keeping the craft or working on it, I believe that you've recommended, it sounds like you're talking about a planning mode or recommended reading for before you have AI run off and do all of these things for you and all these code implementations. So I'm curious to know more about this read only first approach, and if that is the same thing as just talking with AI in planning mode.
Yeah, so this has been like a weirdly controversial topic on social media recently, is like, should you even use plan mode? And Codex folks saying like, we only added plan mode because people were using it in Claude Code, but you don't really need to use it. Okay, so let's go way back to like the 1960s when the Mythical Man Month was written by Fred Brooks when he was developing, or after his experience of developing the OS 360 for IBM, one of the first like big mainframes. He split between accidental complexity and essential complexity. And the two differences, accidental complexities are created by the tooling, all the sort of infrastructure that you have, right? Like a compiler, when a compiler took 5 minutes to compile your code into something that was like machine readable code, like that was accidental complexity. That didn't have to be the case, right? So we've kind of gotten rid of a lot of compile times in a lot of environments. But the essential complexity is really understanding what you are actually building. It's the thing that's up here that you're translating. It's the requirements document, or wherever that comes from, like the imagination that ultimately gets translated into something you're trying to build. And whether that's through an agile methodology or whatever you're using, the essential complexity does not go away. And actually, the accidental complexity continues to be reintroduced regardless of what tools you're using, right? So even now, by speaking in natural language, we're still going to get things wrong that we actually weren't going to get wrong before. I'll give you like a quick example. So I built Plushcap by hand, like, over 3 years before any agentic coding tools. And I started to experiment with them for like unit tests and stuff like that. But I named a variable is public. So each company is public. Like to me, I'm like, is it publicly traded? Is it traded on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ or some other, stock exchange? To me,
Yeah.
that totally makes sense, right? Like I'm one of the only developers who's reading the code. But as soon as the agentic tools started taking over, they're like, oh, is public. Like this company shouldn't be displayed to the user. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I never building this software would have thought about that. But that has added a significant amount of accidental complexity into the design process and the creation process. And I actually catch that frequently when when I'm reviewing the code that the LLMs are spitting out. It assumes that is public means it should not be displayed to the user, so it's trying to hide it, right? So again, that's an example of accidental complexity. So anyway, the whole thing that I'm going back to is like, there's still software developers need to like invest in themselves and understand that like, the essential complexity, the things that you're trying to build are not going to go away. Like increasingly when the model prompts you for more answers of like, what did you mean by this? Like that type of thing is not going away for software developers. So I may have gotten off on a little bit of a tangent there, but that is a lot of what I see recently with software developers using these tools and these workflows and the ways that they just have to continue to improve.
This is great. It really resonates for me. Basically, first of all, I would say what you're saying is that AI cannot read your mind, right? And there's have to be that planning phase, the read-only first approach where you're describing what you're trying to achieve. And it's better to have the knowledge of also the technical level of what you're trying to achieve, because otherwise you're getting into technical depths, etc. And so do you think like actually we're in a phase where we're going to wake up in a year from now, at least like most of the companies are going to wake and realize that agents are amplifying technical depths, that they're actually like the AI coding era will become dangerous and we'll need to find our way out, and or we passed that already?
So this is going to, I don't know, I could be wildly wrong on this, but I actually don't think it changes that much. Like I saw a ton of technical debt when I was a software developer long before LLMs. And frankly, like this is not the first generation of tools that has generated code. It used to be I would be in JetBrains or I'd use Eclipse with my J2E stack, and it's generating all of the boilerplate that was required, the getters and the setters for all the variables on my, what do they call them, like business objects and all those things in the past, right? So like there was still so much that was essentially, I wouldn't say that's like exactly technical debt, but like, did it really need to be there? Like, was that really the best practice? Like best practices change over time. So that's the thing is like, I think you're kind of projecting out, like, do agentic tools change anything? And I think the short answer is I'm not sure that they will, other than the environments in which software development was being done haphazardly before. There will be a lot more code that is written or by agents, and so there's actually like more code to sift through. Now that said, that complexity and that technical debt of the fact that like some people are writing 10,000 lines of code a day, which like I find it hard to believe that you're actually building something that's that complicated. You're not building like a nuclear reactor or something like that, or even that probably shouldn't have that much lines of code, right? So I think the counterbalance to this is that agentic tools could actually help you to get through some of the complexity. Like I've actually found that the best use cases for some of the I'm constantly, just a little bit of side note, but I'm constantly experimenting with like GLM 4.7, Gemma 4 is a great model. I really love using like the local language models. And the thing that I found that they have broken through and being really good at right now is analyzing code. Not necessarily writing the code yet, but because they're kind of like 6 to 12 months behind the frontier coding models, I use them for actually like doing analysis on the code. How could this be refactored? What are things that might be unintended side effects, things like that. So I think that, to answer your direct question, like, will there be more technical debt? I think it's possible if your definition of technical debt is just number of lines of code, but I think that's counterbalanced by these tools getting better over time, analyzing the code and being able to like quickly point out what code is dead code or what code can just be cleaned up very easily. So I'm not sure exactly which side will win.
Yeah, I hear like consistently like what you're thinking about it, rigorously in the principle way. And I think one of the things that you said is related to that is that you're thinking that agent configuration files like CloudMD, et cetera, is going to be standardized. Somewhat like, for example, git ignore, but it's going to take a little bit of time, but we're getting there, right? Because we want to actually use those agents not only to not amplify tech dev, but actually, create some governance around the AI coding so they actually can help us to reduce the technical debt. But I'm wondering, like, what do you think should be the process? Who is the community that's going to drive towards that? Because basically right now it's a zoo, right? There's not only CloudMD, there's so many other files, and there's that like a framework, and there's a more technical language framework, more natural language framework, etc. So how do you think we're going to get there to the standardized like new git ignore for coding agents? I mean, not git ignore, but the framework to tell them how to work and what to do and what not.
I don't know how we get there. Like, honestly, I just think this is kind of the golden age of like experimentation. It reminds me a lot of when web framework, when Ruby on Rails and Django came out, and like, shout out to Django. I still use it. Like, I've literally been using Django almost 20 years. It's like just amazing. And there was this massive explosion of all these different web frameworks and different ways of operating after so many years of kind of like these really heavy-handed Java enterprise tools being like, this, you have to use servlets in order to create a web application. It was like so complicated. And then this idea that you could just create much lighter weight frameworks, and they were so much faster. And the story I always tell, like, is what really, I've been using Python for, like almost 20 years now, after many years of using Java. And what got me to really move into Python and love Python was like, I could program in Java for like 8 hours a day in my day job, and then go home and like code for like an hour or two at night. And I felt like if I was coding in Python at night, I was more productive than the 8 hours during the day. So, and that part of that was the excitement around web frameworks and all those things, and open source projects, just as open source was really, really becoming something that a lot more people and developers could use. And so, to your original question, like, I just think this is kind of the golden age of like, let like 1,000 flowers bloom type of thing. Like the best practices will obviously reveal themselves. I have a Claude MD. I haven't updated it. I don't find it to be particularly useful. I haven't even created an agent.md. Like, I actually have no idea how this stuff gets standardized. My guess is that like what'll end up happening is like there will be almost like a forced standardization because like it'll just be like mandatory that like developers will just be like, I just need, there's 1,000 ways to do this. I just need kind of one, and the community will gravitate towards like the obvious winner. So that's my guess is how this kind of plays out. But I think it's gonna be messy and chaotic right now. And man, what a great time to be a software developer. What a great time to learn, right? Like this is awesome. This is the time in which it's like most exciting to like to learn all these things. Not when it's like every practice has been standardized, but when you have no standardization to a large extent.
Yeah, I think we are in a stage of like early stage of tectonic like shift. And one of the reasons is because it's despite having like code generation tools in the past, now we're talking about agents. It's like more autonomy, more being able to complete tasks more end to end. And because of that, I think like those governance standards, they will going to touch areas that we didn't see before. For example, those governance techniques going to touch the why, the what, the how, the guardrails. I think like before that, you wouldn't expect like to give a tool the reasoning or the company's values or etc. And I think like that's why we're seeing like, for example, skills MD and agents, like skills is like, how do you do things? Like the agents MD is like who I am and why am I doing things? Like Claude MD is like, let me help you, like guide you like a little bit on how I like things to be done, but it's not necessarily like the must have. And eventually like for the enterprise setup, we'll need also those definition of this is a mission critical, should always happen. So I think we're not there yet, but I believe that we're trying actually to build a world where we're codifying the best practices that if we humans did. And because we want to do that, because we wanted to interface with us, we wanted to amplify us. I'm a less of a believer that we're going to see agents communicate with agents and, you know, they're talking in their own language. You know, you remember those like in the tweets and posts, like it's going to be very like, hey, here's how, why, what we like it to do. And like, how do we want to make sure that isn't doing things wrongly? And that's, yeah.
Also, like a lot of the practices around being a software engineer and software engineering teams are just as important, if not more important now. Having a fantastic CICD pipeline with all sorts of tests and things like that, making sure that whether you're doing continuous delivery or you have some sort of staged pipeline, like that actually becomes much more important in a world in which like you can pump more lines of code out, or you have junior engineers who can produce more lines of code. So like I think the agents.md, the Claude MD, it's important for the upstream inputs into the overall system. But if you had a really well-run continuous delivery pipeline already, then you're probably in pretty good shape to take advantage of a lot of these tools. So I don't know. I'm sure there's going to be other really good best practices that'll come out of this. But like, I actually find that like the companies that were doing things to a high level of technical standards before are probably best equipped in order to like take advantage of a lot of these tools without seeing a lot of the downsides, which can be, you know, unintended bugs and things like that that can creep into your system over time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what we've seen in the past and currently is that companies, at least representatives from companies, come together, form some type of foundation or organization or a spec around how a thing should operate and what are all the components within it. And I've seen some, I guess, examples of that with agent, collecting the evidence of agent sessions and like what the prompts and all of the actions that it performed. And different folks from some well-known companies are trying to standardize what that should look like. I don't know how long it will take to actually truly formalize and for that to spread, but there are some efforts. I think we're going to continue to see more of that. But the best practices are definitely changing. The more research that's coming out, I think there was a research paper done about Claude MD not being nearly as effective or not even being considered 75% of the time by Claude itself. So that's the kind of thing that I think is fascinating to continue to see. But
by the way, about agent, I think it's called Agent Trace, or
yes, that's what it's called. That's what it's called. But, with all this activity that's going on, I think there's another side of it, because we're also you're talking about the golden age, and like, I truly agree with you. It is so exciting. There's no rules or middle rules yet. So we've got free reign to really explore and see how far we can take this innovation. And it's all in like the palm of our hands for free, or like $20 a month, or a bit more if you want to get fancier. I think that's amazing. But I think the other part that comes with that is the influx of like information, and the hype in some ways, the people and with different intentions or sharing different information. And what happens when there's an influx of information, I think, is that it's very easy for terms and like the meaning behind things that do have research backed definitions and like a whole history, things get conflated. And in this case, I'm really curious to hear from you about, what do you think the implications of the conflation of some of these terms, like AI model versus agent, like referring to coding agent when really it's an AI coding system that is agentic and maybe has like many AI architectural components under the hood. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are, well, I think there are a lot of companies with very big vested interests in like, kind of trying to grab onto trends in whatever way they can, and frankly, like redefine terms, right? And so, like, you kind of have to look at like, I don't know, one way is to really like look at like, where does the money come from? So like, let's take an example. Let's take Salesforce, for example, which like is all talking about agents, but like if you look at their stock price, I find it hard to believe that they actually are doing anything real with AI, because like I don't, it would kind of show up in some way. And actually, like if you look at these leaderboards, like you can't sign up with an agent to use Salesforce, right? Like it is probably like the worst agentic experience. That's like, maybe not the worst, there's probably worse, but one of the worst. And so like the thing is like, you look at the money. How does Salesforce make money? Off enterprise contracts that are primarily seat based. So what is their goal? Their goal is to redefine an agent to be a replacement for a human. And so everything that they're going to talk about, all the stuff they're going to put out there, PR, they have a huge PR machine, all this stuff is going to be like, agents are equal to people. Why? Because then they can sell seat-based licenses for agents. So I think that's a big part of like trying to unpack, like when you're reading a blog from a company, or you're seeing some CNBC article or Bloomberg article, you've got to like kind of go one step up from there and say like, okay, what is the incentive, like the monetary incentive for them to talk about this thing in this particular way? Because that's probably going to inform the way that they're trying to redefine a term, or introduce a new term. So that's one way that I kind of like try to figure out like what people are actually talking about. I think the other thing is like, I'm actually really kind of shocked as a developer, like how many developers are falling for all like the AI lab, like not like every 3 to 6 months. It's like, this changes everything, breaking news, like, I don't know, like all these, and it's like, oh, like, my favorite cartoon is the one where it's like, this guy is like talking to an LLM and he's like, tell me you're sentient. And it's like, I am sentient. And he's like, oh my gosh, it's sentient. And it's like, oh, like how this is called marketing. I don't understand why people keep falling for this stuff. These are not conscious beings. Like they're just not. Like there's literally no proof of that. Yet every 6 months they're like, this thing is gonna like take over the world. You're like, no, it's not. Like humans using this thing and giving instructions can do bad things. Absolutely. It's not like there's no like risk with some of these things. But we have to understand that upstream from that LLM, that AI model, that AI coding agent, whatever the terms are that are used, is a person that is ultimately guiding the system in some way. Now, you could argue that non-determinism of AI models introduces a new risk vector versus a deterministic software program. But I would also argue that like that's not really true, because bugs are ultimately roughly equivalent to non-determinism in all of the software that has been written throughout human history. So I'm not sure that like any real new risks have been introduced, other than the fact that like these companies just seem to be able to play the marketing card, and developers are like, I feel like should not be falling for this stuff every 6 months. Like we are now, like what does the Primogen say? He's like, we're now 36 months into 6 months away from software developers all being replaced. Like there's, as far as I'm seeing in the data, like there's a significant uptick in software development job openings now, and I don't see that changing. So that's my kind of view on this whole landscape. Is like coming back to your original question, like all these different terms, like yeah, there are what I would call canonical definitions for a lot of these things, but there's this massive battle between these companies with trillions of dollars at stake to try to redefine them in a way that is advantageous for their business. And there's no real way to get away from some of those things. You just have to like have a skeptical eye with a lot of these claims.
Yeah. Amara's law is undefeated here. Like it says we tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run, and we tend to underestimate the effect of technology in the long run. And I think that's exactly the case. For example, I agree with you that right now the blast radius of what AI coding could do is actually not so far from what it was in the past. A bug is a bug, even if it's like a new one written by AI. It could have been really worse if it's written by a human. But I think in the long run, as we increase the autonomy of those coding agents, maybe they're not coding agents anymore. It's more like a team member, right? And in that case, like basically, it's writing code as it goes. Again, I'm talking about the future, okay? Like basically like the code is being written as it's being used, for example, which I know it's a concept that exists for a long time, but that's going to be like, I think a huge trend. And then I think the blast radius is shrinking because, for example, you talked about CICD, which is the same thing as saying quality workflows, AI quality workflow is being returned what we had CICD. Maybe you don't have it anymore because the code is being generated on the fly and being used on the fly. So right now, it totally seems like, I don't know, OpenAI is trying to be Anthropic, and Anthropic is trying to be OpenAI, and learning each other tactics about marketing. And it's overestimated what the AI could do right now. But I do fear that in the long run, we're actually going to bump into those like more dangerously cases.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I do think that those situations will arise. I also think that best practices and lessons learned will fall out of those things. There are companies that have already lost significant amount of money by not having appropriate guardrails in place for their agentic coding tools. And so, if you're a CTO or CIO, you're going to be thinking, well, geez, like we have to make sure we guard against that. So actually, like one of the trends that is really blowing up in Plushcap is like observability, particularly when it comes to LLMs. And so I think that a lot of that is like, companies are trying to get a handle on like, how do we have some semblance of insight into what is actually happening here, as opposed to just looking purely at the output alone. And obviously this goes along with like evaluations and things like that. But there's a lot more investment that's happening sort of like downstream from a lot of these systems. And I think that trend will likely continue to take off as you hear more and more of these stories of like, this company blew up their system and they were down for a week and lost,
Yeah.
X number of millions of dollars because they were not online. Like there will be enough, and you won't necessarily see a lot of that. Like no company is going to want to talk about that in the press about how they screwed up and didn't have appropriate guardrails. But like the CTOs will talk and they will tell each other like, hey, actually, these are the things that we put in place to prevent that in the future. So that's why I'm a little bit more optimistic that while those situations will arise, I think there will be almost like an immune response to it, where there will be investment that will prevents that. So, and I'll say the other thing is like, I think you're absolutely right. Going back to the point about the short versus long term, like 6 years ago now, I got access to a private beta of GPT-3 when it was like very, very limited. And I was working with Jeff Lawson, the Twilio founder, CEO at the time. And like, it was like the middle of the pandemic and I got access to this tool and I was like, this is pretty crazy. Like they can like generate stuff that actually looks pretty good, but I could never have imagined 6 years, well, really 5-6 years later, that I would be writing the majority of my software code with it. Like that seemed like such a wild leap. And yet where are we going to be 5-6 years from now? Like, big question mark. But my hope is that along the way, like I think a lot of times you can just jump forward 5 years and say like, that's scary, but you don't see that like people are smart enough to learn lessons along the way that are going to prevent the worst case scenarios.
I think the closing, an idea that you said in the beginning, I think related to part of the best practices that we're going to see in order to protect from that a future where AI is generating code on the fly. And you mentioned in the beginning that there's going to be, you made a setup where you have a tandem of two agents. One is more focused on review and another is more focused on code generation. And then like basically they're working together on the fly. And I think like we're going to create those systems that the CICD is not just continuous integration and deployment, but there's going to be continuous review and continuous governance, like also in production to say like when we're talking about that six years from now. But I want to actually dive into one of the interesting things that related to your past like experience, developer education, right? You have categories in Plushcap, and also I think it's part of like who you are, like it's very clear that you're very passionate about developer education. And full stack Python that you brought to life was read by 2.5 million developers, but now LLM can answer the same question instantly. So how are you think like developer education tools are dead, or what is the future of developer education in general?
I've given a lot of thought to this. So like I worked on full stack Python for like 10 years. I mean, literally like every day. Like it was like a point of pride. Like my GitHub, my if you looked on GitHub, like my commit history for at least 4 years was literally every single day. And then eventually I allowed myself to occasionally take a day off. But I thought a lot about it. Like once it's not, I stopped working a lot or much on full stack Python, like at kind of the end of 2022 after it had been 10 years. And a lot of it was related to LLMs. So it's kind of like, I'm using chat or like, I'm using some of these LLMs and stuff like that. And that was obviously very early days when ChatGPT was just being released. But I had access to, GPT-3 for a while. And so I actually used GPT-3 to write a page on full stack Python that I heavily edited. But this was like back in like 2021. It was like kind of good enough that I could give it like enough input. And so I think to your question of like the future of developer education, like I have actually like really struggled with full stack Python and like, what is the value there, right? Because I can tell you what a web framework is. Like the whole point of the site was like, I don't know what a web framework is. Can you just explain it to me in plain English? Like, because I'm trying to learn this, or I'm an experienced software developer, but I just, I haven't touched them that much. Like, what are all the components to it, right? And now an LLM can give you that. And so I think I've actually started working on full stack Python again, but kind of reimagining a lot of the content to be two things. One is human written only, like not out of an LLM. Like I write all by hand. Because number one, it's a good forcing function, but number two, it's actually more interesting to read what a person's written. Now maybe that changes, short term versus long term. Where are these things going? But I think still for right now, when you read from someone who's an expert who really cares about something, then the human written content is still has the edge, as long as it's well edited and cared for. And I think the other thing is like I actually have started to add like prompts. Like here's some things that you should prompt an LLM to like go deeper on. Right. Like I'm not going to be able to like tell you about the 1,000 things that you should learn around web frameworks, but hey, like go explore this path with an LLM. LLMs are very good at like kind of giving you, I'll give you an example. Like my son's in 3rd grade. He's learned, geometry. And so like I asked ChatGPT, like, what's a 3rd and 4th grade curriculum for, geometry? And like, it gives you a bunch of stuff. What are some videos, things like that. It's very good for like exploring, but you have to be an active learner. And so I think, there's the combination of like human written content that is engaging, but then forces you to go be an active learner with an LLM is kind of the sweet spot right now. And maybe that'll change over time, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about these things. And so if you're learning how to program, that I think is kind of the mix and match that you should look for.
That's amazing. First of all, I'm impressed that your son is learning geometry in 3rd grade. Now I'm reflecting on my own education because I think I did that in 7th grade. But anyway, it's amazing that you are I guess you're allowing full stack Python to evolve in a way to match where we are right now, where how people are actually probably learning and going to continue to learn. So you're integrating that agent experience in a way that can allow people to dig deeper. I think that's amazing that you're, coming back to that with that fresh perspective. So I just wanted to point that out.
Just to take like a lesson from what are my own incentives, right? Like I always have like a side project or something that I'm like working on. Right now it's Plushcap. It used to be full stack Python. And part of my struggle has been like, I really love full stack Python, but I can only like work on one side project at a time. And so like, I'm kind of like, how can I pull some of that content in, make it up to date, make it relevant, and then use that to actually like bring more people into Plushcap. So if you look for like WebSockets, for example, there's tons of companies in Plushcap that rely on WebSockets or offer a service like Pusher, PubNub, Ably that rely on WebSockets. Well, the combination of like, here's the companies, here's some things related to WebSockets, here's a primer on WebSockets that's human written, is actually like really good content marketing. So again, just to like talk about the incentives here, like I'm sort of, I haven't had a good incentive to like update the stuff on full stack Python because it hasn't been my primary side project. But this is kind of, after thinking through it, this has given me an opportunity to say like, actually all that content, if it was updated, could be useful in a different way. And so therefore I have motivation to go and do that. And then that obviously can help other people, but it also is good for the thing that is like in, primary in my mind right now.
I have another question about that though, because it's open, right? Like full stack Python.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
This must have been used. I wonder if it's been used somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure it's like part of the training data and all that stuff. I mean, I wrote over like, I think it was like, I calculated at one point, it was like over like 100 or maybe 150,000 words across full stack Python, which is like, I mean, over that's like, I think like 2 to 3 novels worth, like, but over 10 years, obviously, and working on it every day and things like that. So I'm sure that it was, sucked into LLMs and, hopefully they I'm sure the AI labs totally appreciate that. I'm looking forward to that big check one of these days.
Right? The royalties or something. Hopefully there will be some retroactive attribution something
it's all
that
MIT
happens.
licensed on GitHub, so probably not.
Oh, yeah.
But it is what it is.
So we're getting it towards the end, and it was really great. But we would really like to hear like 2-3 pieces of advice, and maybe to push toward a certain direction. We've heard that you're using Plushcap in like as a real world AI coding test environment. What did that teach you? What has that taught you that you couldn't have learned in any other way? Like the actual having like a real project that you're day to day trying to push forward. And what are the 2-3 pieces of advice you give people that are at the beginning or actually like something that you think even advanced could think of? Yeah.
So I think there's a few things that have been really valuable. One is like because I love developing software and I love programming. I built, it was probably tens of thousands of lines of code by hand for Plushcap before, agentic coding tools were kind of like good enough that I could trust them. But that also allowed me to establish all the architecture and the patterns that I had learned. And it uses Django, it's using Python. Like I've built a lot of applications with Django. So I've been able to kind of like set the architectural foundation and kind of like try to minimize the amount of like technical debt so that when I started applying agentic tools to the code base, it's just much more effective. I can, just carve out little pieces, like create this new page, create this new, can you optimize this query for me? And then, like a lot of times I found my own technical debt. It's like, oh, you were using select related when you should have been using prefetch related for this query. I'm like, yes, I should have. Wow. Like, man, no wonder that page was so darn slow. And so, these types of things, like it's almost like a little bit of like a back and forth, but because it's grounded in the knowledge and the architectural patterns that I had already set, I think it's much more effective. And I'm actually finding that that's a pattern that people are talking about more, is like kind of write the first version or write the kernel of something by hand. So you really understand it. And then you can start almost like putting layers around it with the agentic or stacking things on top of it with the agentic tools. So, if you have the luxury of doing that, which fortunately I did, that seems to work really well. I'll also say like another thing is like, I think there's like so much doom and gloom right now. Like it's kind of driving me crazy. Like but there always has been like, when COBOL was invented, they said that was going to replace programmers. It was like, oh, you're going to just like program in natural language. Like COBOL was supposed like the original like natural language programming, and then there was like low code. Then like beyond that is like object oriented. Like if you study the history of software engineering, like object oriented programming, we're all just gonna like plug these little different components together, and like that's what software engineering is gonna like develop, go into being. And like then there's like code generation off of UML, low code, no code. Like there have been these patterns and trends. What ends up happening is every generation is kind of stacking additional complexity, and the scope of what you can create with software actually grows over time. And what happens when the scope grows? The complexity increases. What happens when complexity increases? You need someone who can understand the complexity. And so software engineers, like the job is very different from the 1960s, 1990s, 2020s, but they're still software engineers. And so I'd say like, a bit of advice is just like for people that are, thinking about computer science, like if you actually truly love like programming and learning these things, like you should definitely still do it. Like a lot of people, when I was back in high school, way back in the day, and like parents would be like, other people's parents were like, what are you going to do when you go to college? I'm like, computer science. And they're like, oh, isn't that all going away? This is like after the dot-com crash. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't care. I like doing it. Like, what do I care?
How about software engineering in 2030 or 2040?
Yeah, I mean, like you can't be like, I want to program in this programming language. Like then like, no, like that's not going to work. Or I want to only use this one tool. I mean, if it's Vim, that's fine. But any other tool, like, no. Like you have to be willing to adapt. Like the job is going to be changing over time. So as long as you're willing to be adaptable, and I think it actually comes down to like maybe one last little thing, which is like when I hire folks, like DevRel in particular, but even when I was hiring software development teams, it's technical credibility is one of the hiring attributes. But then another one of the five that I have out there is curiosity. And I just think that like that has to be the thing that you have. Like if you have curiosity, you're going to be fine. Like you're going to want to learn that next thing. And then you'll be able to stay relevant and up to date. And heck, if you've got some side projects, things that you can work on, that's also going to help you explore outside the confines of the job that you've got. So hopefully that's like helpful for people that are kind of like, I don't know should I even go into this industry? Like, yeah, you should. Like you should. If you really love it, like you should definitely do it.
And I think something that's been a theme with the way in which you've described things, you seem very optimistic, right, about the future of software engineering and like AI innovation in this space. And you're also skeptical, and you're making sure that you remain skeptical about the things that you do here and the way in which that it's marketed. Do your research, remain curious so that you can actually develop your own opinions and, maintain that sense of like agency, I think, through all of the changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I don't know. I love this field, so it's hard to not be optimistic, but it is and as much as this pains me to say, like I am, because I've been in DevRel, like I do know some things about marketing, and like a lot of the negative stuff is marketing. And so like you gotta just look past that, because they're just doing it to like sell big enterprise contracts. Like they're just driving FOMO with like big buyers. So like you gotta be a little, like you said, like be a little skeptical, be a little bit more critical thinking about what's actually happening. It doesn't, I mean, look, I could be wildly wrong. Maybe it does actually lead down that path, but I am skeptical that it is. I think a lot of what's happening right now is marketing, and it's I think it's it's kind of negative, which is unfortunate.
This was really awesome. I think it's a good time to wrap up, and we'd love to know how to find you. How could people find you?
Yeah, so my tool is plushcap.com. It's free, available for folks. I have most of it you can actually just access by just going to the website. There is a sign up because I found that there were so many bots scraping my server and my content that I had to put stuff behind a sign up wall because my server was basically falling over. So you can sign up for free at plushcap.com to like go into like some detailed reports and things like that. And then I have an about page on there. With my contact information. I'm also at Full Stack Python on X, and that's where I post a lot about. I like to post about Python, but people seem less interested in that compared to like the agentic coding tools and stuff. It's always the new trends, the new hotness. So that's a lot of what I post about on there.
That's awesome. Thank you. Is there like any hidden goal for Plushcap to eventually measure intelligence? Like you are checking trends, you are following tools when they're being talked about, where they're being talked about, etc. But eventually, is there any further, more hidden goal there behind it?
I don't actually have a long-term roadmap for the tool. I have just found that I built the thing that allows me to have the conversations with a lot of startups and people that is I just find really interesting. And it actually is really helpful in that a lot of times I'll talk about I'll talk to a seed stage company, a seed stage founder, and they're like, how do we go raise our Series A? We're a PLG company. Here's the things that we do with APIs and stuff. And I'm like, let's just take a look at some companies that that are, Series A, Series C, Series B, Series C, and let's look at the things that they did in order to drive growth through their PLG engine that you can also do in your own way, not copy and paste, but in your own way, and actually look at the visuals, look at the data, look at everything. And that to me has just been, and then also, what are the trends that you can attach onto to really make sure that the thing, if you're going to do those things, that you want them to be maximally effective. So that's actually, I think, kind of the current state of things. And frankly, it's good enough. It's fun. It may grow into more, again, short-term versus long-term, maybe it'll be a lot more. This was not, the developer trends were not the original vision. Just measuring things and being able to see who's doing what was the original vision. So there's always more that can be stacked on top. So, you may be actually going sort of skating to the puck of maybe intelligence is the next layer on top of that. But I don't know. I kind of just take things one step at a time. I'm a very sort of iterative process person where I'm just I just want to see it, and then I want to build on top of that, and then I'll kind of step back, think about it, see if there's different ways. It's you kind of go to the local. So I did my master's in computer science and genetic algorithms, and there's it's the local optimum. I like to really optimize for the local optimum, then step back and say is there actually a higher peak somewhere? I think that's my learning style. Other people are, yeah, I'm very an iterative process and then step back person. Other people operate differently. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see where it goes.
Thank you so much, Matt. We will definitely follow, and we'll also appreciate that Kodo is being tracked as well on Plushcap. So that was that's it. We're wrapping up. That was the Agentic review, and please follow us, share. And we're lining up amazing guests Matt that are either developer relationship, thought leadership, thinking about the future of software development, because we are here to explore what good code really means in the age of AI software development. Thank you.
Thank you both.
If today's conversation challenged how you think about AI and code quality, that's the point.
At Kodo, we believe that independent, context-aware code review with rules as guardrails is how engineering teams maintain standards at scale.
If you're leading an enterprise team and want to see how intelligent AI code review can reinforce governance, visibility, and accountability in your workflow, visit Kodo.ai to learn how we help teams turn AI productivity into production-ready quality.
And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, share it with your engineering leadership circle, and leave us a review.
Until next time, keep human in the loop.
And keep shipping.